Mana System, Hello, World. By M.J. Markgrove. Chapter 221, Troubled Water. I watched as the workers placed the last armor panel in position and began to weld it into place. It had taken a few weeks to repair the damages from our fight, but the retribution was looking almost new. The replaced sections were clearly visible by the heat transfer in the titanium. I could easily fix that when I turned the thermal defenses on. It should make everything a uniform color. Paint would work too, I suppose, but why cover up the beauty of the metal? It was a good thing the ship was complete. Over the last few days, we had been getting reports from the guild merchant ships that were stopping to trade, and they weren't good. Large fleets of pirate ships spotted raiding islands. The capital of the Avulian Protectorate was sacked and all of the leadership missing. The remaining fleets of the Protectorate were attacking any ship that wasn't theirs or the guild's. Cities burning due to the slaves I helped free. It was madness and it was spreading. Already I could hear concerned whispering coming from the Icelanders. It seemed to be split, half wanted to leave and make sure their families were okay while the other half wanted to hunker down and wait for the insanity to blow over. I wasn't sure either of those choices was a good one. The island was actually thriving. A few of the earliest evacuees returned and they brought others with them. Mostly families and whatnot, but still. As for an economy, I swear Barcos was of a mind to fund the entire thing by himself with his drinking alone. While I didn't think either choice the people were grumbling about was wise, they were probably better than what I was planning on doing. Information was key and we were lacking specifics, so with the ship fixed, we were going to head out and find out what was going on. I had a bad feeling about things and it wasn't helped by reports of occasional ships being spotted on the horizon. If they were pirates, they should have come to dock. Unless they were aware of what happened to the island or the previous pirates. If they knew, it didn't matter. Neither I nor the people on the island could change that fact. The people were trained to man the bunkers and the cannons there, it would be up to them to hold the island in case of attack. All done. One of the workers shouted. I walked over and inspected the work. I had to admit, these workers improved quickly. Superhuman stats helped a lot in those regards. The welds were perfect. A far cry from their initial attempts when I was training them. Good work. I don't have anything else for you fellers to work on, so why don't you go enjoy a few cold ones on me? I tossed a credit sheet to the man that contained more than enough credits to get the 10 men plastered. They earned the bonus. I watched the men as they walked away and clapped each other on the shoulders in celebratory congratulations. I was going to have Charles hire these men on and open up a secondary construction base here, but I hadn't received a reply from anyone back home since I left. Thinking about it, I wasn't surprised. The message cards were enchanted. With my drainer installed in St. June, they wouldn't work. It was an idiotic oversight on my part, but I didn't have the time to work up a runic version to fix the issue. Not that I wanted them to send anyone to the Isles of Mist without a proper escort. There were far too many dangers without a guide. The ship awaited. I stepped aboard the Retribution for the first time in a week. I had been staying at a small house nearby, to remain out of the way while the workers finished their repairs inside. Everything inside looked as good as new. It was actually better than new. I had ripped out or rearranged a lot of the internal systems to make them easier to fix or more redundant to damage. I also managed to improve the shield array by about 10%. This did increase the power draw, but it was nominal. It was also offset by the reduced power waste from my new weapons. Who knew having proper mana conductive material for a weapon that conducted mana would be so much better? All of the cannons had been replaced with my new ones. I even had spares to replace all of those. So I no longer needed the old ones. I decided to donate them to the defense of the island. I doubted anything short of a military fortress sported more firepower now. And while I didn't have the time or resources to craft a city shield, I was quickly able to whip up shields for the weapon bunkers. They would only survive a few shots, but it was better than nothing. I'll be honest, I did it because I felt a bit guilty about causing this whole mess that was going on in the Isles. Sure, I didn't force the pirate kings and their fleets to rampage across the area, but they were likely taking advantage of the chaos, exactly as I wanted my target to do. And it worked. I had received word from one of Emma's spies that Captain Grulane's ship the Forsooth had been spotted within the last week. Kickle was raring to go after he heard that. I had to stop the geriatric Jerboa before he tried to commandeer one of the docked ships belonging to the freed slaves. We had a little spat over it, and after I was forced to physically stop him, he was avoiding me and sulking somewhere. I tried to reason with him. Our time would come, I told him. I sat in my command chair and started testing all of the ship systems. Despite our best efforts, the ship still had some yellow warnings displayed. I cleared them away. There was nothing that we could do about them without scrapping the entire ship. It was fine though, it wouldn't affect the overall performance of the ship too much. I heard the metal of the ship creaking and groaning as I turned up the thermal defense. I didn't leave it on long as it felt like being baked inside an oven when it was set to the max setting. As the ship popped and creaked while it cooled, I rotated the turrets and ran them through the virtual simulation. I noticed a few of the bottom turrets were a bit slower to orient. I sighed, it was caused by the distorted deck, making the pods rub in their alcoves. I added a note to my log for improvements. I scribbled in, replaceable weapon mount sections instead of just the mounts only. It wouldn't be easy to implement, but I would give it to Charles and his engineers to figure out the details. I was quickly learning that while I could come up with some powerful ideas, implementing them properly was not my strong suit. "Where's Kickle?" I asked Barkos as he stepped aboard. "Emma went to fetch the ornery sod. Idiot has been drinking himself blackout drunk since your little hissy fit." "My hissy fit?" "He was the one that punched me for trying to stop him from running off and getting himself killed. Sure, I may have gone a bit overboard in my application of punishment, but Kickle should have known better." "And where did Barkos get off on commenting on other people drinking? The man was half alcohol himself." Barkos shrugged. "You're the captain, it's your right to discipline your crew. But you took it too far, Cap. Remember, I said you need to be better." I wanted to be pissed at Barkos. I was still slightly pissed at Kickle, but despite his many flaws, I knew he was right. "Get your shit sorted on board," I grumbled. "We are going to have some dangerous days ahead, so no drinking until we get to port." I saw the ghost of a smile cross Barkos's lips before he gave me a sloppy salute and walked below deck. I somehow thought I was just played, or was he using this as training? The man was an enigma to me. He was essentially royalty, yet didn't act like it, despised the thought of it even, and actively hated his government. And I didn't even bring up the fact that if rumors were true, he was also likely the highest ranked person in the government left alive, essentially making him the leader of the Avwillian Protectorate. I didn't bring it up with him because I had the strong sense that he was aware of this and was avoiding the responsibility. Plus I didn't want him to beat my ass like I beat Kickle's. Yeah, let's go with self-preservation over cowardice for not bringing it up. Soon enough, I saw Emma. She had 4 people following her, and held between them was a drunken and irate Kickle. Emma and crew pounded down the deck and she stopped midway down the ship and snapped off a crisp salute. "Permission to board, Captain." I quirked my eyebrow in confusion for a moment before I realized what she was up to. "Permission to board granted, Sailor Emma. Welcome back." She stepped across the plank and stood beside me. The 4 burly men deposited Kickle none too gently on the dock and stomped off. Kickle cursed them out before picking himself off the ground and looking around in confusion. That was until his eyes landed on me. I heard him intake audibly before he straightened up and offered a salute. Although, a much sloppier one than Emma's, but still better than Barkos's. "Captain, per permission to board." I gave the jerboa a long hard look before responding. "Do you remember one of the first things I told you after we met?" I would be surprised if he did, not many had my capacity for memorizing things. "No," I thought he was just gonna say no, but he paused and kept going. "No useless people aboard your ship." I nodded. "Are you going to shape up and follow orders, or do I need another pilot?" "On my honor as a jerboa, I will follow your orders, Captain. I will also swear off alcohol if it means you will let me fly with you until I can get my revenge." The man seemed to straighten up as he said this. I knew jerboa took honor very seriously, so this was probably as good an offer as I could ever get. I nodded. "Get below deck and clean yourself up. I want us in the air in an hour." I flashed a cleanse through the man, causing him to twist sideways and hurl as his body rejected the alcohol. "Right away, Captain," he replied as he scurried across the ramp and below deck. I got a distinct whiff of body odor and stale alcohol as he passed, and I was glad I had ordered him to clean up before he entered the command deck. I felt Emma slap me on the back and I turned. "Good job, Captain." The man just needed proper motivation. He wasn't like us prior Legion grunts, but he knows he fucked up royally when he attacked you. He wasn't drinking and avoiding you because you beat him. He was afraid you would kick him off the ship. Well, fuck, that made more sense now that Emma explained it to me. I nodded to the Elixian spy. "Any news or idea where we should start our search?" She smiled. "Oh, yeah, let's get below, I got plenty to share." Chapter 222, The Storm. After weeks of sitting around, the Retribution finally got to fly again. Knowing we were leaving, the harbor was a beehive of activity. Cobbled together crews were drilling aboard the other captured pirate ships. The people knew it wasn't a matter of if, but a matter of when another enemy would appear. As soon as Kickle got us away from the docks and any possible collision, I engaged the cloak. It was far more effective now that I could enable and disable the automatic recharging system. The massive disruption of mana we used to leave in our wake was now a tiny trail. I hadn't had time to figure out a way to smooth our passing completely, but this would have to do. I also had Emma watching for trails from a crudely assembled periscope. Now she didn't need to be on the deck to use her mana sense skill. Speaking of skills, I had picked up a few from the last fight. I also managed to finally hit level 20 in my Maw of the Void class. I stuck 2 of my stats in strength, 1 in endurance, and 2 in agility since I wanted to bring them above the tier 1 threshold of 20. I brought up my stats to see the changes. Paul Fuller Mantra Enchanter / Maw of the Void level 21 20ths. Strength, 22, plus 2, modifier x22. Endurance, 21 modifier x40. Agility, 22, plus 2, modifier x22. Perception, 18 modifier x22. Intelligence, 25 modifier x40. Wisdom, 16 modifier x22. Charisma, 11 modifier x22. Luck, 16 modifier x22. HP, 840, 924. Stamina, 462, 508. Stamina Rigon, M880. Mana, 1000. Mana Rigon, M352. They were straight up monstrous. Most people of an equivalent level would have 1 maybe 2 tier 2 stats. But I had 4 thanks to my luck finding horde dungeons. It was too bad Fiona and I hadn't been able to delve into that undead one. I clenched my fist, feeling my muscles stretch and bulge. I don't think I would ever get over the feeling of power that accompanied a stat increase. I didn't look any bulkier or faster, but it felt like my body had unlocked hidden potential. My movements were crisper, I felt better, and I had to take care not to damage things by mistake now. Yeah, that was a thing when you got physical stats above tier 1. I had tested my strength against some of the scrap armor from the Retribution. While it wasn't easy, I was able to bend the compressed titanium sheets with both hands. Thankfully my master-crafted replacement hand was able to keep up with the new demands of my body. It was no wonder Obadiah Kuth had knocked me through a wall and shattered my area of denial shield. Had he placed his stats in agility instead, I don't think I would have been able to touch him. Next, I looked at the skills I kept from the pirate fight. I had already dumped most of them to the void to try and get better skills, but some were keepers, especially the one I nabbed from the mage. Unstable Mana Vortex, creates a vortex of unstable and dangerous mana that tears through a set path in a random fashion. Anyone hit by this vortex is dealt 10% of their mana pool in the form of direct damage and is subject to a damaging random magical effect. Any active magical effect or spell on the user may be turned against them as well, causing further damage. Triggered effects only last for 5 seconds, Mana Vortex lasts until it reaches 50m from the caster. Cost 150 mana, cooldown 30 minutes. This skill was nuts. While the base damage was low, or non-existent if the target had no mana, the other effects would more than make up for it. If you couldn't predict what spell was coming at you, you couldn't defend against it. You could use a generalized defensive spell, but that would just feed the Mana Vortex another way to cause you injury. Heck, I lost count of how many active spells I had on me at any given time. I did a quick count, at a minimum I kept 6 abilities active, and up to as many as 11. That didn't even account for my magical items, which I had a lot of. Before our little spat, I mentioned the spell to Kickle. He grimaced. That sounds a lot like what happens within a mana storm, only on a smaller scale. Since then, I hadn't been able to test the spell. Its chaotic nature made testing it on the island a bad idea. Using it aboard the ship would probably be worse. But I would find a use for it eventually. The next spell was interesting. Halo of Indifference, creates a halo of golden light around the caster that prevents and negates any mental effects. Will activate automatically to purge any harmful mental attack that could incapacitate the caster. Lasts 10 minutes, cost 75 mana, 75 stamina, cooldown 2 hours. I could have really used this spell back in the Jackal pit. I also had a sneaking suspicion that this spell would have completely negated the magic of the slave collar, but I sure as hell wasn't about to test that theory. I kept this skill for one single reason: automatic activation. While I had my mental defense ring and the title that increased my mental defense, I wasn't immune to attacks on my mind. The last ability I kept was sticky grip. It essentially made it impossible for me to lose grip, either on my hands or feet, and it worked through shoes and gloves. It was an inexpensive and long-lasting spell, so I simply added it to my buff list to run constantly. There was a downside to the spell though. Grappling or kicking someone was a bit more difficult. I had to actively will my grip to release. This applied to walking as well. Thankfully I got plenty of practice with the skill and I was able to relegate it to the back of my mind most of the time. I still occasionally stumbled when my mind wandered and I found my feet stuck to the ground a half-second longer than they should have been. I was getting increasingly antsy. We had been out of the dock for over a day and had encountered over a dozen small scout ships. We managed to destroy all but one as it zipped off into the distance when it came across us fighting another ship. We trailed the ship but lost it when the mists rolled in. We ended up having to skirt away from where it headed because one of those mana storms, Kickle told me about, was brewing. My mana barometer had spiked so hard it broke and Kickle had to wrench the ship sideways to avoid the ominous multicolored fog. Just looking at the phenomenon made my head feel itchy. And even being in close proximity made some of the ship's systems react oddly. Thankfully nothing stopped working and Kickle got us above the storm and away from danger, or so I thought. Sitting dead center above the cyclone-sized storm was a group of 14 ships. The ship we had been chasing led us right to them, or them right to us. Our emergence above the mist didn't go unnoticed. The stealth field was still rippling oddly by being too close to the storm and we left a pretty clear trail of mana vapor where we exited. "He's there," I heard Kickle say through clenched teeth. "Who?" I asked but realized a moment later, the only person that got Kickle this angry was Captain Grulain. I made the smart decision. Get us out of here, we can't take 14 ships. It was too late though. Over 24 small attack craft were already racing to intercept us. I strapped in and started activating the weapons before I radioed the others. "Strap in, we have incoming ships." I was pretty sure Barcos was either sleeping or keeping Emma company in the back by the periscope. I was pretty sure the two had a thing going on but it wasn't any of my business. The Retribution lurched in a roll and dove back toward the waiting mist below. I didn't question Kickle's decision. If he thought it was safer in the turbulent mana, then he was probably right. We weren't going to make it before the enemy ships arrived though. I watched as they grew closer and I could see cannons had been replaced by nasty-looking harpoons with mana heart tips. Shield breaker harpoons. They mean to capture us, spin the ship to make it harder for their weapons to stick. Kickle gave a curt grunt before he started spinning the ship like a top. This made it harder for me to hit my targets but it was a worthwhile exchange. I fired at the same time 3 harpoons pierced our shield. 2 deflected off the hull but the third almost gained purchase as it tore a line through the titanium armor. I wanted to know what the hell those harpoons were made of that they could tear through armor like paper. Thankfully, I didn't have to find out the hard way. I scored 1 kill before the Retribution dove below the mist. The only problem was, this enemy fleet was heading directly for the island we used as our base. We may have been away for a day but if we made a beeline back it would only take a few hours to get there. It was only our bad luck that a mana storm and the mist had covered the enemy's tracks. We needed to get back to warn the people and prepare to defend the island. I won't lie, for a moment I did consider just up and leaving but I had grown to like some of the people on that island. They were all hardworking and never complained about their previous situations. Honestly, I felt more akin with them than I did with anyone in St. June, other than Martin, Fiona, and Ska. How did I know this pirate fleet was heading toward our island? Well, there wasn't another island within days of our current location and even this island was out of the way. It's what made it such an attractive base for pirates. Thankfully, the mana storms didn't pass over islands. Something to do with the reason why the islands floated that broke the storms up before they got close. Not that this information helped us at all. The enemy would use the cover of the mist to get close to the island. Without the ability to see, most of our defenses would be of little use. That's why I needed to get the captured ships in the air. 3 ships against 14 were better than 1. The island was a hub of frenzied activity shortly after we arrived and told everyone what was going on. The first person to approach me was surprisingly the guild representative. "Captain Fuller, a moment of your time if you please." I sighed and walked over to the well-dressed man and his entourage. "You're going to have to make this quick, we have incoming pirates." "Yes, about that." The guild ships cannot take part in this conflict, unfortunately, unless that is you have decided to accept Director Tolish's generous offer. I had expected this response since I heard rumors about the guild ships not engaging in the defense of the Avwilian capital. And while it was tempting to take him up on his offer here and now and join the guild, I wasn't quite ready to accept yet. I haven't come to a decision on that matter yet. A pity then. I wish you luck, Captain Fuller, and if you and your people survive I am sure we will meet again. With a curt nod, the man turned around and his party headed straight for their ship which was already beginning to cast off from the dock. I ground my teeth in frustration, but a few more ships weren't going to do much to win this fight. It was eventually going to come down to a ground battle because the enemy wanted one thing, me or my ship. Well, they were going to have to kill me before that happened and I wasn't going to go down easy. Chapter 223, Beachhead. The meager fleet of ships I was now in charge of, rose from the dock and slowly spiraled into the air to get above the mist. The chaotic coloration of the mana storm was visible in the distance even through the mist. That meant the enemy was almost upon the island. The Retribution was the first ship to breach the thick covering and it was no surprise to see the enemy ships had spread out in a crescent shape to surround the island. Enemy fast attack craft zipped toward our location and I double-checked that everything was working as it should. I had also turned the mana accumulator back on. I sometimes wished I had been able to fit multiple layers of shielding on the ship. But my experiments in that regard had not gotten anywhere. Shields that closed together acted like soap bubbles. Either they popped completely or merged together, but it didn't increase the strength of the shield when they did. The only way to prevent this was to have separate bubble shields that only covered a certain area. This wasn't a very effective defense though as that left exposed parts of the ship and cost significantly more mana draw. The first enemy ships came within range and I fired at all three of the small craft, while Kickle tried to avoid the harpoons again. I heard the grinding tear of metal as one of the harpoons pierced the side of the Retribution. Kickle spun the ship, yanking the smaller vessel hard enough to tear the entire front of their ship off. The enemy might have these absurd harpoons but we had power enough to make them regret using them. The other ships with me finally surfaced above the mist layer and turned to engage. I was glad these ships had normal cannons, they had a much greater range than the Retribution's guns. A few of the smaller ships managed to break away from the incoming fire but the vast majority of them disappeared below the mist. Muffled explosions could be heard from below as they impacted the uninhabited portion of the island we were currently over. There would be no fighting aboard ship today. I had ordered Emma and Barcos to remain on the ground and help the defenders of the city. If any pirates boarded our vessel, they would be in for the shock of their lives. As for the other two ships, they had enough explosives aboard to make the pirates regret boarding them. These people had nothing to lose so they had taken it upon themselves to protect as many people on the island below as possible before they finally sacrificed their lives. I knew exactly how they felt and I wasn't about to let them die for nothing. Our ships turned toward the outer edge of the encircling formation. The remaining pirate ships were already moving to intercept us, but if we could reduce their numbers a bit we may yet succeed. I didn't miss the 3 armored warships or the forsooth amongst the ships arrayed against us. I had convinced Kickle to ignore his greatest enemy for the sake of survival. I activated the null beam as we raced at our first target. It was turning to get a broadside on us a moment before the invisible beam of energy sucked away all of its mana. I had learned from my mistakes in the past and my aim for the follow-up burst from the weapon speared through the center of the ship, bursting out the top deck as it started to fall from the sky. I felt the Retribution jerk as a few incoming rounds impacted our shield. The 2 enemy ships within range were getting pounded by my fleet though. We hadn't had much time to come up with a plan, so I just told the other captains to focus fire on one ship until it was knocked from the sky. It was working, at least while we had the number advantage. Already, the other enemy ships were closing into firing range. We managed to take down 2 more enemy ships before one of ours took too much damage. I could only watch as the crew went to try and ram into one of their attackers. But the pirates pounded it from range, not letting it get close enough. Then it exploded. The shockwave battered the enemy ships but it didn't cause any of them to crash. Kickle took advantage of the confusion though and lined me up for a shot with the null beam. I activated it and the beam of disruptive mana tore through the ship I targeted and the one behind before it dissipated. Our attack didn't go unanswered though. 3 of the armored warships opened fire on us. I gripped the seat with white knuckles as it shook violently under the barrage. The hull rang like a bell as the last few cannonballs slipped past our downed shield and exploded against the deck. More shots came as I and the remaining ship with me tried taking down another ship. Our combined firepower tore through the faltering ship's shield and blasted large holes in the side of its deck, but it didn't fall from the sky. I was still waiting for the null cannon to stabilize so I could fire it again when dozens of incoming cannonballs impacted the front of the Retribution, taking the cannon and a good chunk of the forward section with it. The Retribution lurched about like a dinghy caught in a storm before settling. There was another explosion that tossed us away. When we stopped cartwheeling across the sky, I saw the wreckage of the last ship we had with us. It had managed to maneuver itself between one of the warships and another pirate ship before detonating its onboard payload. But it wasn't enough. The enemy still had too many ships and the Retribution was no longer stable in the air. I made the difficult call. Take us down, we can't fight them in our condition. Kickle didn't acknowledge my order, but almost immediately we slipped below the mist. As we descended toward the ground, the ship continued to shake as more and more random fire was sent our way. I could see the ground glowing as mist cannonballs impacted the rocky surface below and exploded. Then the ship lurched sideways, throwing us hard against our harnesses. The entire command room went dark for a moment as the main power conduit was severed by a lucky shot. Free fall sucks. Even if it didn't last long, the sensation of being inside an enormous tin can as it falls from the sky unassisted was not pleasant. My backup power conduits kicked in and shunted energy to the damaged flight systems, but we were still falling, only a bit slower. I don't think I can pull it out of this free fall, Captain. Kickle strained and grunted as he fought the failing controls. I braced for impact by casting every skill I could on myself and Kickle. I even multicast Second Chance on the Jerboa. Something I hadn't used on anyone besides myself since I left St. June. I had a bad feeling this crash was going to do some real damage. We passed through the bottom of the mist, which was blasted away by all the enemy fire and falling ships. That was good and bad. At least we now knew how far we had to hit the ground. The bad part was I could see the city in the distance. Already the bunkers were firing into the mist. I quickly engaged the helmet on my armor as we rapidly approached the ground. I wanted to swear and cuss out these fucking pirates, but I didn't want to bite my tongue off on accident. I estimated the time until impact and cast Rejuvenate on Kickle, and Regenerating Rain on myself. The ship impacted the surface with a boom. I saw the shockwave propagate out for a split second before the entire power system just stopped working. We landed belly down and I could feel my spine compress under the titanic force of the impact. But I was far hardier than Kickle. I heard the Jerboa give a gurgled grunt as his head snapped down, then back up. The impact had snapped his neck. But only moments after the fall killed him, I saw his head snap back into place thanks to my healing. He let out a strangled cry as he flailed around in confusion for a moment before he looked at me. Captain! I died. How did you bring me back? I stored my helmet away and spit out a mouthful of blood. My lungs had collapsed from the crash and I was having a hard time breathing until my healing completed its job. A skill, I wheezed out when I could finally take in enough air to reply. I tried to release my harness but found both my arms were dislocated. I winced from the pain, my healing would snap them back into their sockets shortly. We need to get free of the crash site, I coughed, my lungs almost fully restored. Kickle nodded as he produced a dagger and sawed through the straps holding him in place. I also saw him guzzle down a healing potion. Probably a good idea, my healing spell wouldn't have restored him fully. I screamed as I felt my arms pop back into their sockets. I took a few deep breaths as the pain was fading. I popped a health potion as well as a mana potion before Kickle made his way over and cut me free as well. Besides the collapsed lungs and dislocated arms, I was in remarkably good health. Kickle was healing, but he had taken the crash far worse than I. I activated Healing Touch on him and injected another mana potion into my leg before tossing the used injector across the deck. We need to get to the city and its defenders before the pirates get to the ground. We can try, Captain, but I don't think we have time. Fuck it, let's try anyway, I responded, pushing Kickle ahead of me. It wasn't to use him as a shield or anything. He was just smaller. If the decks had caved in from the impact, he might be able to get through if I couldn't. That didn't turn out to be an issue though. The ship had cracked along the old damage, only this time it left a gaping hole from where the ladder to the top deck hatch used to be. The side of the Retribution now sported a hole large enough to drive a car through. We waited only a moment, noticing the sounds of impacting cannon fire had ended. We could still hear the bunkers firing into the sky, but with the mist covering everything it was impossible to get a bead on the enemy ships. I motioned for Kickle to hurry out the opening. He jumped to the ground in one fluid movement and I was right behind him. I heard him cough on the haze of dust kicked up by our crash. Thankfully I had my helmet back on so it wasn't affecting me. I saw him quickly tie a bandana across his face and put on goggles before we both looked around. "Which way?" he shouted over the noise of distant cannons firing and the roar of wind-blown sand. I pointed in the direction I thought I spotted the town in and we began to run. I felt the weird tingle before I heard the pulsing magic as ships breached the area of blown-away fog. Then everything really kicked off. Now that the bunkers had a target, dozens of cannons fired at the first ship to appear from the mist. This is usually a good thing. Unless you are near said ship and trying to flee for your life. Each successive impact sent out a small shockwave that pounded against mine and Kickle's bodies as we tried to scurry away from the battle zone. There was a flash of light and we were thrown to the ground. The enemy ship had exploded. I wanted to cheer but I was forced to dodge a spear as a group of pirates teleported near us. I used Time Shutter as I prepared an overcharged unstable mana vortex. "Run!" I screamed to Kickle a moment before I let the spell rip at our attackers. I was transfixed for a moment as a ball of multicolor light that looked like oily water grew in front of me. The ball grew to about 2 feet around in an instant before it shot forward like a drunken bullet. Tentacles of unstable mana reached out and touched over half of the pirates as the ball zipped across the distance before it exploded in a shower of sparkles. While the spell was horrifically beautiful, what it left in its wake was anything but. One man had been converted to stone, an unfortunate woman was liquefied. One was still screaming as fire consumed him from the inside out. There was ice, dark corruption, acid, you name it. The spell had wrought havoc on anything it touched and only a few of those had survived its rampant onslaught. But I didn't stick around to see any more. I had used Blink Step to run away as fast as I could. It wasn't because I was afraid of the survivors of that little clash, no, it was because of the other 6 ships descending through the mist. I kept tossing out the little remote teleportation scramblers that I built when I attacked the Stygian Order base. It was working for a bit too, until one group of pirates appeared in front of us, cutting us off from the town. Kickle jerked to a halt and hissed. When I looked up, I saw that the pirates in front of us were all Jerboan. The captain was plain to see by his height and swagger. "Running away again, father?" Captain Grulain hissed mockingly. "Father? What the fuck, Kickle?" Kickle spit on the ground in front of him and already had his bladed whip and dagger out. "My son is dead. The thing standing before me is but a shadow of a real Jerboa." Grulain chittered in amusement before pulling out a saber and a dagger. "You say that like I give a shit about your opinion, old man. Now, come, it's time I laid you to rest along with mother." The two rushed at each other in a high-speed clash. I wanted to rush in and help him but the other Jerboa was circling around the fight with weapons out and I also had the pirates behind me coming up fast. As soon as the first Jerboa cleared the fight, they rushed me. I blasted the first one with my mana cannon and the second with energy lance. Both Jerboas were instantly killed by the magic but I was quickly on the defensive as I ducked a thrown dagger. I needed to conserve my mana as it hadn't fully recharged so my staff appeared in my hand and I spun it in a blur of motion that knocked 2 more daggers and a spear away. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw one of the Jerboa shudder momentarily. I threw myself sideways as he appeared next to me. His glowing sword scraped across the front plates of my armor as I elbowed him in the jaw, continuing my sideways twist. All of these Jerboas were massive specimens, even bigger than that guy I fought in the market. But they didn't lack speed like that guy. I was only able to avoid this attack because I recognized it for what it was. It was the same ability Abadiakuth had on that ring. My body was still in pain from the crash so I didn't want to risk activating the aura of rage. I moved behind my attacker and smashed my staff into his back, causing him to stumble forward and fall. I saw people running from the town to help, I only needed to hold these guys off long enough for that to matter. Something exploded against my back, tossing me through the air. I rolled with the fall and turned to see what hit me. There was a floating man, conjuring green balls of what looked like plasma. He wasn't from either of the first 2 ships, so he had to be from the newer ships that were hovering above the crash site. A quick scan over the area showed more and more pirates flying or teleporting down to surround the area and some were moving toward the incoming villagers and who I assumed was leading them. Probably Barkos and Emma. There was no way the former slaves were going to be able to defend against these ships and the pirates. I looked toward the ships, then at the retribution. A broken wreck below their encirclement. "Sorry, girl," I whispered before I produced a small clay disc and snapped it in half. Then I threw myself to the ground. The world went white and all sound was washed away as my anti-theft runes activated, turning the remains of the retribution into a massive explosion. Even my new spell Sticky Grip wasn't enough to keep me attached to the ground as the shockwave from the blast tossed me over 100 meters across the rocky ground. I groaned in pain as I levered myself off the ground. When I looked toward the crash site, all that was left was a blasted crater and a group of falling and burning pirate ships. I heard an angry roar from off to my left and spotted the lion-oid Captain Sarvis, the enforcer, getting to his feet. His eyes immediately locked on me and his blade was halfway out of his sheath before the world seemed to pause. Found you. The words reverberated like a clarion call across the entire battlefield and chilled me to the bone. Chapter 224, Unexpected Arrival. Those two words seemed to freeze everyone in place, but it wasn't magic that caused it, it was fear. My body was frozen along with everyone else, but my eyes rose into the air, tracking two creatures as they forced the magical fog away from the entire area with some ability. It was hard to tell by their alien physiology, but I got the distinct impression they were looking directly at me. The initial fear was subsiding and people were starting to move again until the larger of the two squid-like creatures cast a spell. I managed to get off and identify before the spell hit. Ulk Void Hunter / Maw of the Void 47 41sts. Zif Psi Commando / Maw of the Void 45 42nds. My body shook as I realized they were here for me, but not a single person or even the entire pirate armada currently assembled here would be able to kill these two creatures. I felt the spell wash over the area and everyone was frozen again, but a halo of golden light burst into existence above my head, washing away the spell's effect. The smart thing to do would have been to stay here and hope to use the pirates as cover while wearing down these creatures. But I knew that was a useless effort that would see innocent people die for me, so I ran. I only made it a few steps when I felt the air around me pull. It felt like an enormous vacuum was trying to suck me into the sky, but Sticky Grip was keeping me firmly on the ground. I tossed out an overcharged unstable mana vortex at the creatures. The cost of having to activate it with multicast was absurd, but the creatures split apart as the dangerous magic headed their way. The magic pulling on me must have been disrupted as the pull ceased and I activated Blink Step, Charge, and my wings to propel myself away from the battle site. Then I felt the tearing sensation that seemed to originate in my soul. My breath caught in my throat as two of my skills vanished. I didn't have time to see which ones, but I used Sunder skill on both creatures as well. So we were now even. There was an angry burble as both creatures suffered the same sensation. It made me smile for a moment before a blast of mana landed beside me. I stumbled from the explosion before cartwheeling out of control down the crater that the retribution used to lay within. I managed to tuck my arms behind my head and protect my body until I finally came to a stop. I was bruised but alive as I picked myself up off the ground. The two creatures were floating toward me and I was confused as to why they weren't attacking me for a second. Then it dawned on me. They were resetting the cooldown of Sunder skill. I took the moment to glance at my skills. I swore as I saw Energy Lance and Reverberating Strike were gone. In return, I got Portal of Desecration and Mind Link. I wanted to see what they did, but I didn't have time as the larger one blasted me with some sort of beam. My whole body shivered as my mana pool started draining quickly. I tried to cleanse the effect and it worked as the beam cut off. I produced a mana injector from my ring, but before I could punch it into my leg, it was ripped from my grasp by telekinesis and thrown into the distance. Then I felt the soul-tearing pain again as two more skills were ripped from my mind. I screamed as I clutched my head, shaking away the dizziness as I retaliated. But I only had enough mana to cast Sunder skill one time. I targeted the larger of the two as it seemed like the more dangerous opponent. His mind resisted my attempts though, and my spell cost me another 50 mana more than normal to cast, leaving me with only dregs remaining. But the creature reeled from my attack, giving me enough time to inject another mana potion. I lost Victorious Shout and Healing Touch and gained instant cast. I wanted to keep up the fight, but I felt a wash of peace and tranquility flood my body and I relaxed and smiled. I cursed as the effect wasn't considered harmful by my spells and thus reset combat yet again. I was proven correct a moment later as the tearing sensation returned. I stumbled backward and tried casting Maddening Laugh but found the skill was gone. It would have been able to keep the combat active and keep these creatures from continuing to reset the battle. That only left me with Cage of Vengeance. First I cast Sunder skill on the smaller one, hoping for something I could use before I cast the cage. I cursed my luck as I reacquired Victorious Shout. Damage wasn't a problem, these two creatures were after my skills. The crackling red bars of the cage formed around the three of us, but I swear I heard a derisive snort from the larger one as its tentacles flailed around and a glowing pattern of symbols appeared in the air. The cage shook for a moment as the glowing symbols expanded into a vortex that sucked the entirety of my spell into its voracious maw. I could only stare blankly because even though the spell was gone, my mana was still reduced for the next hour. The creatures just stared at me and I was growing angry and desperate as they floated there, until one of them spoke. "You cannot win, human. We will take what is ours, but if you force us we will leave you with nothing. Fuck you and the horse you rode in on. I earned everything I have and I won't give it up without a fight." I wanted to spit at the creatures, floating in the air without care, but that would be childish, so instead, I flew at them in a burst of motion enhanced by skills and my flagging, yet quickly recharging mana. My staff appeared in my hand, wreathed by lightning and ice. I let out a primal scream as I activated Aura of Rage and flurry of blows. My first blow seemed to land on the squishy creature's head, but it seemed to slide off without having any effect. Faster than I could see, and before I even got a second strike, the creature wrapped two tentacles around my staff in a grip like a mountain. He spun me around like a top before I had time to release my grip on the staff and I was sent flying into the ground at high speed. I felt the hard rock give way to my body as my impact created another small crater. Only a quick activation of unstoppable force prevented me from breaking my back upon impact. I lifted myself out of the rubble just in time to have two more skills ripped from me. My mana had recovered enough, so I retaliated in kind. This time I lost Festering Wound and Second Chance. I winced at the loss as what I gained was not worth the exchange. Warp Perception and Void Lottery. Although that second one seemed to anger the smaller of the two as it lashed out. Tentacles of dense water tore from the ground. I managed to dodge the first two, but the third slammed into my midsection with enough force to launch me across the crater. I slammed into the ground 200 feet away and wheezed to catch my breath through broken ribs. I managed to cast Rejuvenate and look up as the larger one seemed to be lecturing the smaller one. I took the opportunity to try and flee. I made it 20 steps this time. A new record. Before both creatures appeared in front of me, I felt my body lock up as they pulled two more skills from me. As soon as my body was free, I hit them with Frost Wave. The smaller one squealed as frost coated its body, but the larger one just used some sort of fire shield to block the attack. I realized my mind was beginning to slip into fight or die mode and I belatedly cast Sunder skill, but could only afford to do it once. I decided to focus on the smaller one. He seemed like the weaker link. If I pissed him off enough, maybe he would outright kill me, denying them their prize. The exchange was Arcane Bolt and Godly Might on my end to a skill called Depth Charge from the smaller hunter. I was finding a lot of issues with the skills I was acquiring from these creatures though. They needed more than two hands to cast. "Enough," the larger one mentally commanded. I felt the impulse to stop, but my spell activated again and the golden halo washed away the compulsion. I wish that had been the end though. I felt all my limbs jerk painfully outward as if someone attached ropes to the ends of them. I screamed as my joints protested against the force. But something slammed into my face, seeping through my helmet like it wasn't even there and covering my mouth and nose. I struggled fruitlessly against the invisible binding spell as the creatures took turns ripping skills from my soul. My body writhed in agony as the little one, named Ulk, seemed to take particular joy in his task. The bigger one, Ziv, had a detached air of indifference as he stood there and held the magic that prevented me from retaliating. After a few minutes, I heard the smaller one speak telepathically. "Got one." The only thing I had been able to do other than struggle was to watch more and more skills disappear from my list. So I noticed the skill he was referring to was that glob skill I hadn't been able to find any use for. It seemed like his announcement pulled Zif's attention from me long enough for me to pull my one arm free. I didn't waste time aiming it at the pair and firing off the blast of mana. I got a satisfied scream from the pair as the magic holding me in place vanished. I hit the ground with a grunt and managed to pull the substance off my face before it felt like the weight of a mountain suddenly pressed me down. "No more!" Zif screamed into my mind. I didn't even have time to recover my wits before I felt my body tossed into the air, then forcefully slammed into the ground. The impact jarred my head and I saw stars, but the action repeated a few more times. I felt bones break and ligaments tear as each impact shook my body. I felt like a ragdoll in the hands of an angry child and there wasn't anything I could do to stop the abuse. I crashed against the ground again before the angry Zif threw me hard against a pile of loose rocks from all the craters. I felt my body crash through the top layer of loose rocks before it slammed against the hard ground below. My last thoughts before I passed out were of my failure to deny these bastards what they came for. Zif hissed as he gently probed the bubbling skin from this infuriating human attack. He had lashed out as recompense, but it was below him to be so undisciplined. Zif blamed Ulk for distracting him at a critical moment with his stupid celebration of recovering the glob tracking spell. The only thing that brightened Zif's mood was the fact that Ulk had taken the brunt of the mana blast as was writhing on the ground in pain. Zif let him suffer for a bit before he cast a healing spell on the two of them. "Quit acting like a bottom feeder and let's finish up here," Zif rebuked the younger Ma. They found the human in a rock pile. It was thankfully unmoving and their work proceeded at a rapid pace. Another 3 minutes of stripping skills and they had everything they came for. If Zif was a petty sort, he would strip all of this human's skills. And if there was any chance this human would survive in the crushing depths of their home world to take revenge, he would have killed him, but there wasn't. Zif only wished that outsiders understood the danger they were being saved from, but telling them never worked, so it was far easier just to remove the threat by force and return to their world. Zif made sure that Ulk cast the duplicate Sunder skill to the void. He knew how tempting it could be to have the duplicate skill, but balance must be maintained. There couldn't be a repeat of the Devourer War. Zif and Ulk retreated through a portal as the loose gravel and dirt covered the unconscious human as he lay at the edge of the crater. Chapter 225, A Valuable Lesson. Groaning, I opened my eyes. All I saw was darkness. I tried turning my head or moving, but it seemed like I was pinned in place. I fought down the urge to panic as I evaluated my condition. My arms were still broken, the sharp stabbing pain when I tried to move them told me as much. I could breathe though, so my organs had healed after the beating I had taken. That was something at least. Seeing as I was in no immediate danger of dying, I checked my skills. My blood ran cold as I saw what remained of my abilities. Rejuvenate. Multicast. Eye of the Storm. Aura of Rage. Calcifying Strike. Frost Wave. Orb of Darkness. Energy Lance. Overcharge. Tempest Ball. That was the sum total of all the skills I now had. They had stripped me of every ability I had stolen from them, along with every ability my second class gave me by default, making it impossible to recover skills by stealing them from others. I let out a morbid little chuckle as I lay there. Tears of frustration leaked from the corners of my eyes, which caused even more anger and frustration to bubble up as I couldn't even move to wipe the tears away. Seeing as self-pity wasn't going to do me any good, I overcharged Rejuvenate to top my health off and hopefully set some of the bones that were just fractured. I ground my teeth through the pain as my body healed the breaks. The feeling in my good hand returned after a minute or so and I was able to wiggle my arm around. It soon became clear that I was buried under a bunch of loose rocks and debris. My hand broke through the surface, but I was too weak to pull myself out. Groping around blindly, I picked up fist-sized rocks and threw them off my body. The process was a slow and agonizing one, and I kept having to suck back on the burning anger that threatened to overwhelm me. Eventually, I cleared away enough rubble to pull myself out of the hole I was buried in, using my one good arm. I screamed in pain as my broken limbs were jostled around, but I didn't stop. I wanted to, but I let the burning pit of anger fuel me as I slowly pulled myself out of the hole. My legs were a mangled mess that would take weeks to heal. My other arm with my mana cannon was not much better. Broken in at least 3 spots and dislocated. I stored my helmet and coughed as I breathed in the dusty air, but it was at least fresh air and not my armor recirculated stuff. I pulled myself over to a larger rock and braced my broken arm against it. I used my good arm to pull on my wrist. There was a slurping sound as the protruding bone was pulled back under the skin and I took a shaky breath. The wound quickly closed as my healing did its work. The bone would still take time to move back into place, but getting it closed would speed up the process. With that done, I positioned my shoulder near the rock and pushed down as hard as I could with my torso until the shoulder popped back into the socket. When I woke up from passing out, the pain in my shoulder had gone away. My healing spell was still going, so I hadn't been out long, 15 seconds maybe. I coughed again from the dirty air, spitting out a mouthful of blood and dirt. Then I put my helmet back on. Looking around, all I saw was devastation. I didn't know where I was or how far from the town I had fled during the fight with Ulk and Zif, 2 names I would never forget. I thought I saw smoke rising in the distance. It wasn't the black smoke that was rising from the crater I was in, so I thought it might be chimney smoke. It was the best idea I had for direction, so I pulled myself along the ground 1 arm length at a time. By the time I reached the other side of the crater, night had fallen. Everything was quiet, and if it wasn't for the damage, I might even call it peaceful. I was surprised that nobody had come to look for me, but when I thought about it, I probably wouldn't have come either. Anyone that had the opportunity to identify those 2 monsters would know what was chasing me. The chances that I would survive or escape if they intended to capture me were essentially 0. It still pissed me off though. With a heave of effort, I lifted myself over the rim of the crater and got to see the battlefield for the first time since the fighting had begun on the ground. There was still some mist that clung to the island's surface, but most of it had evaporated during the day. The smoke I saw was coming from the town, but it came from a burned-out house along the outskirts. I could now see the occasional flash of magic or hear the boom of a cannon firing within the city. Now it made sense why nobody had come to find me. The fighting was still in full swing, and by the fact that the enemy had forced its way into the city, it was probably not going well for our side. The field was littered with corpses, and my eyes settled on a particular pair that pained my heart. Lying in a heap was Kickle and Grulain, who I now knew to be the older Jerboa's son. Somehow, Kickle had gotten behind the younger one and mounted his back. His bladed whip was wrapped around Grulain's neck and Kickle's tail around his son's waist, so he couldn't be shaken off. Unfortunately, the younger Grulain had used the opportunity to viciously and repeatedly stab his father in the back by using a dagger held in his flexible tail. This hadn't saved the captain of the forsooth, but it had ensured his father died with him. I pulled myself over to the pair and reached up to my former pilot's head. I unclipped the black ring from his ear before whispering him a farewell. Your journey may have ended, but not before you reclaimed your honor, my friend. Rest in peace. I closed the grinning man's eyes and ensured the son was truly dead. The bulging eyes and frantic scratching to try and remove the whip from around his neck put a smile on my face. Serves you right, you piece of shit, I muttered. I searched around but didn't see any other crew members. I did see a few of the townsfolk dead amongst the pirates, but it was far less than I had thought. I also didn't see Sarvis amongst the dead, which meant he was still alive and likely pushing his forces into the city. I needed to go help, but in my condition, I was more a hindrance than an asset. But I might be able to take out a few fringe pirates. I may have lost 90% of my skills, but I still had some powerful options available to me. Crawling to the edge of the city had exhausted me, but I found what I was looking for. There were a group of injured pirates tending to their wounds or sleeping. Nobody was here guarding them, likely because none of the other pirates wanted to miss out on the action. I targeted the most awake one with an overcharged tempest ball. The man tried to scream as the ball of water engulfed him, but it was cut off almost immediately as he sucked down the raging torrent of water. The last man that was awake tried to shoot to his feet, but I hit him with energy lance. I was going to use Frostwave as that was quieter, but without overcharging it, it wouldn't silence him anyway. The man exploded as the force of my attack hit him in the chest. Before the others could wake up, I activated an overcharged Eye of the Storm. They were all weak enough that I didn't have to maintain the spell long. Even the little bit that I did, left me feeling drained. I didn't stick around though, as I dragged my body away from the fight. I was the crippled Avenger as I struck 3 more times during the night. Anytime I located a pack of wounded pirates, I pounced from the darkness like a predator. My last attack had not gone very smoothly though. I pulled the long sharp blade from my side and threw it away, wheezing as my wound closed. The man had caught me as I was dispatching the wounded and stabbed me in the lung with his rapier before I could react. I looked over at my attacker as he struggled fruitlessly on the ground as the calcification spread from his torso. My gruesome work was bringing me closer to the fighting, so I decided to hide in a dark alley to avoid detection while my latest wounds healed. It wouldn't stop me from jumping any lone injured when the opportunity presented itself though. 10 minutes had passed before I heard a voice from behind me. Holy shit, Captain, is that you? I spun around, wincing at my injuries before I saw who had snuck up on me. Emma, I croaked. Holy shit, it is you, you look like shit. I had mistaken you for a pirate and was about to stab you in the back when I noticed your armor. Let me help get you back to the command bunker. She lifted me up and I groaned in pain as my mashed potatoes legs didn't support my weight. Fuck, those squid dice did a real number on you. I grunted. What happened? I'll tell you all about it when we get somewhere safe. Try to stay quiet, we gotta move through the sewers. Look who I found, Emma said as she strolled into one of the bunkers with me slung over her shoulder. She set me down gently in a chair, but I still took a sharp intake of breath as the pain shot through my body. Well, fuck. Glad to see you're alive, Captain, Barcos spoke, looking exhausted. What's the status of the battle? He gave a tired shrug. We have them at a stalemate at the moment. The bunkers were far better defended than they figured, and they have no way to breach the shields en masse. So they have breached the shields? I inquired as I tried to find a less painful position to sit in. A few of their sneaky members teleported past the shields and managed to kill a few people, but Emma and I took care of them. Now they don't have anyone else that can try, or they are holding them back. That doesn't mean we are winning though. What about the civilians? Barkos rubbed his face. The kids are safe, what few were in the town. The rest have taken up arms and are the only reason we are still holding the pirates at bay. I feel like Sarvis isn't pushing all that hard though, and it has me worried. You think he is hoping for reinforcements to bolster his position? I asked. Yeah, Emma cut in. That's why I was out searching the city. We had reports of explosions and was wondering what was going on. I nodded. That was probably from me. I ambushed 3 camps of wounded pirates before you found me. I didn't see any reinforcements though, so they probably aren't coming by land. Maybe he is hoping for a ship to arrive. I know we still got those damn guild pricks floating in the distance, waiting to see who wins, I grumbled irritably. Barkos looked hesitant for a moment before he spoke up. This can be over in a moment, Captain. I knew what he was getting at and I sighed. He was right. I could save the rest of the people on the island and make it so the pirate kings and their cronies fucked off and left me and mine alone forever. So why was I so hesitant to agree? The terms weren't even all that bad. I knew why, because it meant giving someone control over me, even if only minutely. Can you signal them? With a relieved smile, Barkos nodded. The man was flippant and annoying at times, but he cared about the people of his kingdom. Chapter 226, The Devil You Know. As soon as the pirates realized the guild ships were approaching the island, they broke off the fighting and retreated toward the edge of town to dig in. They weren't stupid enough to attack the guild, but it seemed they wanted to ensure there wasn't an accidental incident. One of the guild ships docked and the captain stepped off to greet the 3 of us. I had been carried over by Barkos and Emma on the same chair she plopped me in the night before. My legs were looking less like mashed potatoes now and instead looked like mushed putty. It was hard to ignore the sensation of the bones moving around within my shattered legs, but I was managing. Captain Paul, I hope this wasn't a last-ditch attempt to hold off your enemy. I can assure you, we will leave for safer shores immediately if it was. I ignored the man's condescending snark before replying. You have the agreement from the director. I do, he smiled. Do you wish to review it? I nodded and he produced a stack of documents and a table from his ring. I also noticed a convenient pen placed next to the document. I will remain here while you peruse the document. I can assure you, that if you sign this agreement, the pirates will have no recourse but to leave. Although they have no means of escape. I would recommend forcing them to wait for a friendly ship out in the crater. Let that be a convenient reminder to them of what happened, the captain smiled. Why wouldn't we just kill them? You could, but the guild ships can only interfere with this conflict if they attack you first, after you sign the document of course. Of course, I replied blandly. But, if you attack them first, they have all rights to defend themselves under guild law. Here I thought the guild defended its own at all costs, I stated as I started reading the long document. We do, but we have to give face to governments across the multiverse, even if it is only a token gesture. I simply nodded as I continued to read in silence. Sarvis paced the area his remaining forces managed to secure. It had been 2 days since that damn guild ship docked, and the other one hung overhead like a sword ready to proclaim judgment. He didn't know what those bastards had promised the guild to get them to disregard their neutrality, and he didn't like it one bit. Boss. One of the scouts ran up to Sarvis, breathing heavily. A guild representative is approaching the barricade with 3 others. Sarvis hissed, finally, make sure everyone is ready once we learn what has been going on. Sarvis dismissed the scout as he hurried to the front line. When his eyes landed on that Blade Master bastard, he let out a low growl. The man smirked at him as his eyes landed on Sarvis. He recognized the other 2 as well. The damnable face changer, she had killed a significant number of pirates among his crew, and their captain. He had thought the man was killed outright by those voidlings, but somehow he survived. Although he was leaning heavily on an ornate staff. Sarvis hadn't run into a voidling in decades, but they were not opponents you wanted to face. His estimation of this captain's skill rose a notch. It didn't make Sarvis like him anymore though. In fact, he growled in annoyance at seeing the man still here. That man and his infernal ship had cost him over 200 lives and his entire remaining fleet. What he wouldn't give to wrap his hands around the skinny human's neck. He pictured squeezing the life out of the man as he approached the 4 people who were stopped well clear of normal magic range. Not that Sarvis would attack the men with the guild representative standing next to them. Captain Sarvis, I presume, the guild representative spoke first. Yes, Sarvis growled out. Good, good. I assume you have overall command of all of the forces on your side that remain on the island. I do, what of it? Excellent, that will make this transition easier. By guild mandate, you and your forces have 30 minutes to vacate the city and 2 miles beyond. Failure to do so will be seen as aggression too. Sarvis cut the man off with a roar. What is the meaning of this nonsense? The guild has no claim over this city. This city belongs to the pirate kings. I am afraid you are mistaken, Mr. Sarvis. The city belongs to the civilians within. So what if it does? They are not guild citizens, Sarvis argued, but he felt something was off. Normally you would be correct. But the esteemed Captain Paul, here, the guild representative, motioned to the man that could barely stand upright, causing Sarvis to growl in annoyance and earn a glare from the same man. Has just decided to become a fully pledged guild member under good standing. As such he is protected by guild mandate. I fail to see your point, Sarvis ground out, furious that his prize of killing this upstart captain was ripped from under him but refusing to relinquish the town. If you would stop interrupting me, I would tell you, the pompously dressed man replied. All of the town's citizens were queried by the guild and all have agreed that they work for Captain Paul. As such they are also protected members of the guild as per mandate. Is that clear enough for you? Captain Sarvis. Sarvis clenched his jaw tightly as the other 3 people smirked at him. He took a step forward before the guild representative tut. If you assault any member of the guild, your actions will have consequences, up to and including your boss. Think very carefully before you act, Mr. Sarvis. Sarvis did the only thing he could, he turned around and began to walk away. He only stopped when he heard the unknown man speak. Tell your boss, this isn't over. That simple phrase sent a chill down Sarvis's spine. Not because he feared this upstart captain, but because of what his boss would do to him after he relayed the message. He was thoroughly tempted to turn around and maul the prick to death here and now, but he sucked down his pride and stomped off, yelling orders to his remaining men. Captain Paul, you shouldn't shamefully provoke people. Especially powerful people like the Pirate King, the guild representative chided him. Don't you mean Pirate Kings? I corrected. No, there is only one Pirate King. He likes to use the smokescreen that there are warring factions of pirates to take over areas. We have known for some time about his proclivities, but he has vast resources to draw from and we have been unable to curtail his activities through non-violent means. Why not just kill him? I replied in anger. The man shook his head. If we killed everyone that angered the guild, there wouldn't be anyone left. Sometimes diplomacy is required, even if it leaves a bad taste in our mouth. I ground my teeth in frustration. What about those 2 that attacked me? The voidlings. My recommendation to you is to drop that matter. Even if you managed to get to their level. And nobody not born of their home world has ever survived the journey to their home world. You may think of attacking them when they are off planet, but they only ever venture out from there to hunt others such as yourself that have void-related classes. One of the stipulations of my contract was to show my true level and classes. I gripped my staff in frustration and turned around. Gather the survivors, it's time to bury the dead and clean up here. After a week, another ship picked up the remaining pirate forces. They stayed well clear of the town since it was flying the guild flag from every building. My legs were mostly recovered by this point and I could hobble around with a bit of help from my staff. I was a lucky one though. Over half the civilians had lost their lives in the fighting. This along with Kickle's death hit me hard. Thankfully, I didn't have to direct anyone to work. Those that weren't fixing houses or cleaning up the debris were helping me lay out the new keel for a ship. The guild ship stuck around and more came and went, but it wasn't just to provide a defense. They were watching as I built the ship. Fat lot of good that would do them. I was making it as bare bones as possible to get home. The contract said I had to provide any ships I sold to the merchant house for the next decade. It didn't specify anything about building my own fleet or giving away ships. Although, it did require a minimum of ships I had to sell in that time frame. It also specified that the ships had to be the same configuration as the Retribution. I took that to mean the original configuration. There was no way I was selling the new weapon or the upgraded monolasers or monocannons. Still, it was frightening to think of having 20 such ships terrorizing people across the multiverse. The guild provided the materials I needed to build the ship and I left the work to the few dock workers that survived. Being some of the higher-leveled civilians on the island, they were in the thick of the fighting. Most did not survive, but their sacrifices saved many more. I erected an obelisk in the center of the town, immortalizing the name of each individual that died on our side during the fighting. It was a somber reminder that life was fleeting and while I lived for battle, I was not immortal. The remaining workers gave me an estimate of 6 months to build the ship. I just nodded at them and told them to take their time. I had a lot to think about and process after the events of the last year. Losing my skills hurt, but I didn't really care, all things considered. I had enough money that I could replace them with similar skills. It wasn't like most of them were all that unique. The few that were impossible to replace, according to the guild rep. I had asked him about it after signing the paperwork. I figured if anyone would know, it would be a merchant that worked for the largest organization in the known universe. According to him, even if I did find a certain missing skill, they would be bound to a specific class, or the skill simply couldn't be copied, which is how most skills came to be available on the market. He did warn me not to go searching for another void skill, or I would just bring retribution again, and even the guild couldn't stop the voidlings before they struck. From what he was able to tell me, the voidlings were one of the primal races of the multiverse. They were also known as a keystone race, or one of the founder races. Ancient and powerful but reclusive. They only roused themselves from their world when the multiverse was threatened. I had no idea what sort of threat I posed on the multiverse, but it made me shiver nonetheless. Epilogue. Martin strode down the hall of the Capitol building with a worried smile on his face. He was a bit grayer now, but he still oozed charm and confidence. Time had been kind to him. The city had become a booming metropolis in the 10 years since Paul returned, after his year and a half of being missing. Martin knew something had happened because one day a bunch of massive flying ships had come from nowhere and obliterated the ships that had been harassing the city non-stop for over 6 months. They had quickly taken care of Lord Vic T and his remaining forces, the man managing to flee back to his home world before the guild caught him. When Paul had returned, he had returned a quiet man. You could see the loss in his eyes. But the man pushed on and his businesses flourished, producing the Earth's mightiest warships and most advanced runic items. Then 5 years after Paul returned, he took a fleet of 10 of his capital ships and vanished for another year. When he returned again, the ships were scarred and patched, but Paul never did say where he had gone. Martin eventually got Paul's second-in-command Emma to tell him what happened. She would only say they made good on a promise and the world was a better place for it. Martin decided to leave it well enough alone. He had other stuff to deal with at the time. Then another 5 years passed and Paul's agreement with the guild was complete. Martin's son had just turned 10 a month or so ago and the entire gang was there to celebrate. Ska and his mate Nalam along with their new litter were there. Martin didn't really trust the Narmani female, but it seemed like Ska had her well in hand. It was easier now that Ska had retired from being the city's guard captain. It had been a shock for Martin to learn that Grimalkin only lived about 45 years. With Ska now being in his late 20s, which equated to mid-60s on a human. The party was a joyous time with Fiona gifting their son his first weapon. Martin would have preferred his son not to need to defend himself, but he wasn't a fool to deny his kid some protection. Ska agreed to train Jacob in hand-to-hand combat, something Martin was more than open to for his son. Then Paul came in and gave Jacob a full set of runic armor that was designed to grow stronger and resize automatically with Jacob as he aged. It had seriously been too much, but Paul just shrugged it off like it was perfectly normal. So when Martin heard that Paul had left again, he was rightfully concerned. Because his friend had not taken any ships this time. He simply vanished through some complex runic machine he had built without telling anyone. The other engineers couldn't make heads or tails of what it did or where it sent him. Only that the man had been working on it off and on for over 2 years. Emma, please tell me you have some good news. Martin asked Paul's second-in-command. I have news, whether it is good or bad, I can't say. Maritun sighed and motioned for her to continue. Well, whatever this machine is, it didn't vaporize him. Martin choked. What? I didn't even think of that as an option. She just shrugged. I guess that means you have a limited imagination, she added wryly. For fuck's sake, Emma, this is serious. Paul is missing and nobody seems to know where he is or what he is up to. You know the man better than almost anyone. Where do you think he went? Well, this isn't a teleporter, or at least not a normal teleporter. Any blind fool can see that since they are everywhere nowadays. I had spent years researching my target. My conclusions? The guild representative had been right, trying to fight the voidlings in their home turf was a measure in futility. A planet as large as our pre-system sun that was made entirely of water. There were a few aquatic species that might be able to brave the upper layers of a planet like that, but to get where the voidlings made their homes was impossible. So I dropped that idea. Then I got the news that the Pirate King was on the move again. While I may have stopped putting myself on the line for personal glory, it didn't mean I had cut myself off from the world. Using my new power as a guild member, I slowly absorbed the remnants of the Stygian order. In the grand scheme of the New World, they were a tiny organization. But they were well versed in uncovering information for me. So I put them to work on the real problems and not this little stuff they had focused on for the first 2 years. With their information, I gathered my fleet along with Emma and went to retrieve King Barkos for a bit of well-deserved revenge. He absolutely hated being king and it made me smile. Since I considered Barkos still part of my crew, he fell into the protective envelope of the guild along with everything he controlled. This forced the Pirate King to recall all of his forces from the Protectorate. Unfortunately, I couldn't claim the same about the Jerboan Federation. They became the Pirate King's new target, but he found stiffer resistance than he expected fighting them and was forced to pull back and return to his old ways of striking out at lone ships. I made sure he never sought greener pastures elsewhere on Earth by eliminating any scout ships he sent out over the decade. So when I finally decided to engage his main fleet, it was only a little surprising that the Pirate King tried to flee. In a Retribution-class ship no less. I don't know where he purchased it from, but it didn't matter. It was a civilian design now and not nearly up to par with even the smallest strike craft of my current designs. My ships had long surpassed the ships that the shipbuilders allowed outsiders to buy. It was funny because if the shipbuilders had given the Pirate King the same ships that they used, he may have been able to take over a sizable chunk of the planet. It's a good thing those guys were paranoid about their creations being used against them. I chuckled at the irony. When we finished decimating his fleet of over 300 ships, capturing the pirate and his surviving flunkies was easy. I simply sent a signal to the Retribution-class ship, freezing all of its functions. It was immensely gratifying to watch the elf that had caused so much bloodshed and mayhem swing from a rope. His second-in-command didn't go down quite as quietly, and Barkos gave me the honor of crushing him. Years of personal tutoring by one of the best fighters I had ever met saw me through the short conflict. See, unlike Barkos, I didn't care for an honorable fight. I used every advantage I had and all the enchanted gear I had crafted to tear the Lionoid to pieces, figuratively. When I was done with him, he was broken but alive. At least until we strung him up next to his boss. I didn't stop there, however. After saying my goodbyes to Barkos, I had Emma infiltrate the Silian nation on what had once been mainland China. See, the Silian had fallen on hard times in recent years as I mass-produced the device that counteracted their callers. Since they had problems in their home world, they had mostly abandoned this outpost empire. I used that to stage an anonymous attack on their capital city while Emma used a stealth ship to litter thousands of collar deactivation devices over the countryside. Of course, the Silian knew it was me that was doing this, but they couldn't prove it. That's how things worked in the guild. Outright attacking another member was frowned upon, but that didn't stop groups from jostling for position by attacking other groups anonymously. This was just payback for the Silian trying to attack St. June and Kickle Island shortly after I returned. They quickly found out that using slave soldiers against the man that created the means to free them was a real shit idea. It worked out for me though. I now had enough freed slaves to fill my entire fleet of ships. And these were the most loyal people you could imagine. After I returned from that campaign, I set about working on my next project. The one that would see my revenge complete. It had taken 5 years and over a dozen failed projects before I succeeded at building the device, but it was now ready. I double-checked the 2 target beacons I had to create for this to work. See, I had learned a fascinating bit of info a few years prior. Skills had a unique resonance to the person they came from. So I built a device that could track the source of my resonance. It located 3 unique signals. The bastards had each kept at least one of my skills. I smiled when I learned that. Then came the device. I planned on giving those 2 squid pricks exactly what they wanted, but that meant I needed to join them. I was okay with sacrificing myself to see my vengeance complete, but if I didn't have to, that would be better. The device wasn't simple. It essentially mimicked what the reclaim skill did, that had been stripped from me so long ago. Except, it didn't just pull the skill into the void, it pulled the resonance in and anyone unfortunate enough to be attached to that resonance. Finding information on the void was not easy, but I did learn that magic simply didn't function there. Which worked in my favor. As I was prepping the device, I looked over at Emma. We had surprisingly become close friends over the years. And she was smart enough to know I was up to something shady, so she was keeping an eye on me. I felt bad for lying to her about this, but it had to be done this way. She must have seen me glance over and realized I was about to do something. She got up and yelled something. She ran over to try and stop me, but I flipped the switch a moment before she could reach me. There was no moment of transition as I appeared in endless darkness with my armor fixing itself into place through a complicated series of mechanical motions. Next, a force bubble, that I had purchased, appeared around me to keep the caustic void from damaging my armor while I worked. Humanity had managed to create some fantastical magical and technological marvels over the last decade, and the armor and bubble were purely technical in nature. I tossed the first device through the field and it stopped a dozen feet away before it flashed with power. A moment later a smallish blue squid flailed about in confusion. Ulk had been enjoying the embrace of his lover when he felt an unfamiliar pull. When his eyes adjusted he found himself floating in nothing as he flailed about to try and right himself. But his tentacles couldn't catch on anything. In his flailing, his eyes landed on a human. The human smiled cruelly through a transparent helmet before tossing a ball through a glowing shield. Zif was hunting in the deep when he was pulled from his world. He felt the alien sensation and even tried to counteract it with some of his own magic, but it had failed to prevent it from pulling him in. Unlike his flailing colleague, he was calm as he allowed himself to float and rotate slowly within the new environment. Soon, he too saw the human. "So, you have found a way to get to us," he sent mentally. Zif remembered the human. "I'm only giving you what your people seem to seek. Do you know where we are?" I waved about, using the cold gas jets of my suit to keep me stable. I watched the larger one look around before his eyes grew big. "This is beyond cruel. You have condemned us all to the void as retaliation for what we did? We saved you. Void skills are dangerous and addictive, even for our species. A war that almost brought the universe to its end early on was caused by one outsider as he tried to gather more void skills." I shook my head. "I don't care about the ancient past or even the void skills that you stole from me. You attacked me, and this is payback for that. You love the void so much, well, here you are, enjoy it for the rest of eternity." I looked at my chronometer. Since time didn't pass in the void, I had had to come up with a solution to that problem before attempting this madness. "You should have left me alone," I said a moment before I vanished, leaving the two voidlings to their dark fate. When I appeared back in my lab, it was in the middle of Emma and Martin having a shouting match. They both stopped and looked at me. "What?" I asked.